This video is sponsored by Atlas VPN. What titles do you think of when someone asks you to name a survival horror series? Resident Evil? Silent Hill? Maybe The Evil Within, Dead Rising, or Deadly Premonition? The list of games to choose from is extensive, and you could go from the most popular modern franchises to the most underrated entries and take your pick. Across all of the most well-known survival horror games, there is something that they all have in common, despite many differences in mechanics and storytelling techniques. Raccoon City, Silent Hill, Crimson City, Willamette Parkview Mall, and Greenvale are all in the West, more specifically in the United States. Parasite Eve's New York is a massive part of its identity, as is the case with Obscure and its All-American High School. Although games like Haunting Ground and the Clock Tower series tend to go a little more European with their setting, as is usually the case when a more gothic environment is desired. However, with many of the games I've mentioned, the developers are Japanese. The survival horror genre isn't defined by its geographical location, which begs the question, where are all the survival horror games set in Japan? Now, the most obvious answer for many people would be Fatal Frame, a series that has seen multiple installments and is arguably a staple in the genre. It's drenched in a traditional Japanese atmosphere that has persisted through each of its entries, and gets mentioned quite a lot in online spheres. Yet there's another game series whose Japanese setting is at the core of its unique character, and doesn't get anywhere near as much attention as it should. Siren, also known as Forbidden Siren in PAL regions, is the first entry in a timeline of 3 games in total. It received a sequel which also graced the PlayStation 2 a couple years later. Then, in the summer of 2008, Siren Blood Curse, a reimagining of the original game, released for the PS3. Before even beginning work on the original game, series creator Keiichiro Toyama had already built a name for himself in the world of horror, having made another favourite of mine, Silent Hill. After creating one of the most influential titles of all time, Toyama left Team Silent and joined Japan's studio in 1999, which is where he began designing Siren. Just as Toyama's previous title left a unique mark on the realm of horror games, Siren introduced distinctive elements of its own to the genre. It's largely known for its Sightjacking mechanic, where you can tune into the eyesight of an enemy and even assign them to different buttons, so you can flick between them quickly to keep track of their positions. Stealth in games normally relies on what you see through your character's point of view, but Siren shares the load of the perspectives of every person within a level, whether friend or foe. On the surface, it's an unusual and stylistically impressive game, and I for one think it's even better the deeper you look into it. However, Siren is a notoriously unforgiving experience on the PlayStation 2, which a quick search across internet forums shows has driven some players away from getting very far with it. Regardless, I believe Siren is genuinely one of the greatest survival horror games to exist, and the passion of those who worked on it shines through in the final product. It's always daunting for me to talk about titles I adore this much, so I hope I do it justice. Just a warning though, I do discuss the game in a fair bit of detail, which includes the ending scenes, so I wouldn't recommend watching from here on out if you're worried about spoilers. But if you're staying, grab a drink and some snacks because it's time to jump into Haneda Village. The setting of Siren is based in the fictional village of Haneda, which is located near the outskirts of Misumi County in Japan. It's surrounded by mountains, and as a result is very much isolated from the rest of the country. As such, it has remained a very traditional place, with its technology and communications having unlikely advanced since a reported earthquake in 1976. The inhabitants of Haneda hunt and grow their own food, so their self-sufficiency is just another reason to have little contact with the outside world. In the spring of 2002, the development team decided to visit some infamous abandoned and/or haunted locations in Japan, while conducting research for Siren. Some of these locations even had certain landmarks quite faithfully remodeled in the game. Even the sound of doors opening and closing and footsteps were all basically recorded at an abandoned house the team visited. Toyama wanted to ensure that Siren was a distinctively Japanese experience, and this goes so far as the humidity of Japan being reflected in the game's environments. On top of this, the distinct muted colour palette stained with piercing red hues also finds its stylistic origins from other Japanese creations. This is explained by the game's art director Isao Takahashi.
My design comes from lowering saturation and using low-toned colors. I guess it's something like period dramas captured on film as opposed to taped TV dramas these days. I think it's quite a good fit for showing Japan's unique climate and a sense of noise.
While I couldn't find any official confirmation that this particular place was visited by the team, I believe they at least used photos of it as a reference for Haneda. The Nichitsu Ghost Town is an abandoned tin mining village near Chichibu in the Saitama Prefecture, and features buildings like a dilapidated school, clinic, numerous homes, and of course a deserted mine. Images of these places are practically identical to the areas you visit in Siren, so it felt very eerie finding these pictures as I was immediately transported back to my time in the game. It was an odd sense of everything suddenly seeming a lot more real, and the fictional village of Haneda didn't feel so fictional anymore. A book called Walking the Ruins was cited as an inspiration for the kinds of emotions you can provoke when using these types of environments.
This guide-like book introduces a variety of ruins and abandoned villages in Japan. This book was what alerted me to the existence of the ruins genre, and I actually went to some for research. Buildings that have been abandoned as relics from the past, crumbling over many long years. Creating this special kind of thing using CG was one of the challenges. "I cried at the ruins" is a line by Toru Korihara, ruin investigator and the book's editor, which I found left an impression on me, and I used it for reference as a theme when dealing with ruins.
When you take a closer look at the rooms in the game, they feel frozen in time yet lived in. There are details and belongings strewn across floors and tables, shelves filled with books and scribbles on chalkboards. These spaces were carefully conceptualized, and then brought to life with all the finishing touches we explore on our perilous journey through the game. In order to help figure out the layout and scale of one of the levels, they even built a clay model of a rice field area that's about 3 meters in length. The game will transport you through locations like the Arato shopping district, which is one of the first you experience. It features a cafeteria, barber shop, and a tobacco store, along with a couple homes and quite a few enemies strolling around. There are also residential districts like Hariadori and Tabori that showcase the way the villagers lived, their tranquil domesticity broken by the sadness of what transpired to those who called Haneda their home. The steep terraced fields of Karawari make up for one of the game's most open areas, allowing very little cover from the prying eyes of the monsters that roam within it. It's situated near the church, and is likely the reason why many graves can be found on its grounds, which haven't been cultivated in a very long time due to the dwindling population of Haneda. In spite of this, there is an elementary school that was built, although it's exceptionally small and its facilities, including the library, seem to be used by the entire village. We also visit the old Miyata clinic, where you can uncover Haneda's dark secrets in the sinister rooms of its hidden basement, and some of the game's most memorable cutscenes. This clinic is situated between Hironotsuka, a historic part of the village that contains ancient shrines and a spring, and Gojaku Peak, a mining facility that connects to the neighbouring Janakubi Valley where the processing plant is located. Every part of Haneda serves its role in portraying a functional community that has its own quirks and cultural specificities. Plus, Haneda even has a specialty dish called han noodles, which are only found in the restaurant in Hariadori for 330 yen, and are based on the recipe for Morioka ramen. Instead of kimchi, it's topped with strawberry jam. And according to the development team who tried out their fictional signature food, it tasted absolutely awful. The faces of characters in Siren are one of the most distinguishing features when it comes to the game's visual style. The expressions of the in-game models dissolve into one another, creating a deeply unnerving and uncanny feel. To achieve this unique look, photos were taken of the actors' faces displaying varying emotions. The photo data was then used to create a single face texture that was projected onto the 3D model. This method was uncommon for games at the time, as character faces were usually symmetrical and comprised of half a face texture which was mirrored. As such, the amount of data for Siren was a lot higher, but the team were determined to achieve the most photorealistic look that they could. Similar attention was paid to the bodies of the characters too, as the pictures taken of actors were from 8 different camera angles. These images were taken after the costumes, makeup, and even dirt were applied, and many real outfits and accessories were prepared for the shooting. These photos were used as bases for textures which were then layered onto 3D models that conformed to the physique of each actor. The cast of Siren wasn't just composed of members of the development team, which was a common occurrence with games back in the day. Instead, there were actual actors hired to play the main roles we see in-game. Each character feels as though they received just as much attention as the other regardless of their screen time, which helped make the unusually high number of playable personalities for a horror game all the more successful.
Normally at the stage of the written proposal, you'll start to get an idea of the general plot summary, right? But with Siren, there was none. I had no option but to reconstruct the scenario in my head, and even that took 2 or 3 days. But the style of having an ensemble cast was something that Toyama was particular about from the start. I thought the method of not narrowing down the hero to one person was a pretty interesting one.
The total number of performers was around 30, with apparently about 50 people involved in photographing the actors. This process spanned over 2 weeks for the pictures alone, which were taken from numerous different angles in order to have the material needed to form the outer layer of their virtual counterparts. And this doesn't even include all the motion capture that took place. The amount of preparation and the techniques used were closer to that of making a live-action movie rather than a video game of that time. When conceptualizing the appearances of the enemies of the game, the Shibito, whose name translates to corpse person, Toyama described the idea of humans transforming into incomprehensible creatures. They're not just dead bodies moving around aimlessly like zombies, and that's something that's reflected in the game in a sorrowful way. The Shibito's path is determined by the kinds of actions and routes they'd take when they were alive, with their humanity clinging on through remnants of their daily routines. You may see a mother watching TV before going to prepare food in the kitchen, or a daughter drawing on the floor and then spending some time in her room. The most horrifying thing is watching the expressions of the Shibito as they twist between anger, fear, ecstasy, and pain. They seem equally lost in madness as they are peaceful, and it makes you wonder how aware they are of what's happening to them. Toyama wanted their existence to be scarier than dying, and I don't think there's anything more frightening than your very self ebbing and flowing with something you can't understand for all eternity, to the point where it all eventually disintegrates into a mere instinctual habit of repeatedly walking around the places you'd visit in your daily life. There's a sadness in seeing so many ordinary people fall victim to something so strange and horrific purely out of proximity. Even so, within the game we see instances where those who have mutated still have their humanity fight back at times, like in the case of Takato saving Harumi from the principal, which allows her to escape. These earthly habits of the Shibito can also be used to your advantage. For example, there's a level where you need to steal the revolver from police officer Ishida, who was a known alcoholic in his human life. To get his attention, you have to throw a bottle of sake into a puddle of red water that has an exposed cable touching it. And when he starts lapping up the alcohol, that's your cue to turn on the power and electrocute him, giving you the opportunity to run up and take the firearm. Initially, you'll come across half Shibito, those who are yet to undergo their final transformation and markedly have red liquid streaming from their eyes. But as the game goes on, the appearances and behaviours become less human, and the number of those who aren't fully transformed slowly dwindle. The first Shibito design that artist Miki Takahashi drew was that of Mina Onda, which upon seeing Toyama knew immediately that this was the direction he wanted to go in. It represents that strange shifting otherworldliness on the inside now spilling out onto its exterior. It utilises features reminiscent of marine life, with its brightly patterned tentacles growing from her face. Another character's design employs a fusion of a monkfish and a sea anemone. You'll also find barnacle-like growth on the faces of others who have been transformed by the mysterious red water of the game. And even the dog Shibito has antenna-like parts that remind me of the appendages of a sea slug. According to an interview with Miki Takahashi, the direction for the fly Shibito began with the idea of a crane fly. These are usually found near lakes and streams, and often lay their eggs in water, thus giving them at least some relation to underwater domains. From the looks of it, the final design is more akin to a dragonfly, which still makes sense considering they hang around bodies of water and while in their nymph stage of their life cycle, they are completely aquatic. In that same interview, the design concept behind the god Datatsushi, the final boss of the game, is also given some context.
Toyama showed me a photo of a slightly strange kind of seahorse, a leafy sea dragon, and explained, "This is how I want it to look." That image was projected onto its incomplete form. I was pretty much left to create its complete form from scratch by myself. Its image is a bit like a Haniwa figure or Shakoki Dogu. The team had a theory that Datatsushi was a fish that came from space, so we said, okay, let's say that the figure was made by somebody who saw Datatsushi and filled out its image.
Considering how prominent the Red Sea is to the game's story and visual identity, having these underwater creatures inspire some of the designs is a perfect fit, especially since things that live in the deep sea usually have a very extraterrestrial look to them. The noises that the fully mutated Shibito and their leader make are often very alien in sound too, but at the same time, its properties make me think of some strange transmission that was recorded in the depths of the ocean. The dedication to the sea themes within the game is going to become increasingly prominent as this video goes on, but to really hone in on its importance for the meantime, one of the original titles for Siren during the prototype phase was Jukai, which means cursed sea, although this was dropped quite early on.
Regarding the combination of humans and sea creatures, as there was the aspect of the sea sending ritual in the story, the art director requested that sea creatures be incorporated into the Shibito's design. However, I preferred to detach myself from a traditional horror design. There are many monsters with decaying bodies, big mouths, fangs, and glaring eyes seen in other works. I also felt that if the creator's intention of trying to intimidate viewers becomes too obvious, the result would be less interesting. The Shibito is a physical manifestation of God's blessing. They're not zombies, but rather bodies that are being reborn. This is why I incorporated the colours and shapes of lively, beautiful sea creatures in the design. I also believe that ultimately in horror, there's a fine line between humour and pity. The final design was an outcome of pursuing this line.
Despite the appearances of the Shibito being mainly drawn from marine life, their behaviour is a little different. Their capabilities vary depending on their type, with the dog Shibito, for example, darting around quickly on all fours, but are unable to open or close doors like many of the others. The spider variant also scuttles around on 4 legs, but is able to scale walls and ceilings too. Their heads are twisted and covered in multiple eyes, and they tend to have sharper senses than the dog type. The fly species, on the other hand, buzz around equipped with a gun of some sort, and hilariously look like their wings can barely carry their body weight. Finally, there's the Shibito brain, which will often attempt to flee from combat. The undead creatures form a kind of community, and on some levels there's a central brain that the other enemies are connected to, so if you beat the leader, all nearby Shibito are also stunned. Speaking of which, when they are knocked out, they curl up on the ground until they recover. Whenever I would see this stance, I would instantly picture a dead spider and the way its legs contract. Many spiders and insects in general do instinctively play dead when stressed or injured, so I thought it was an interesting detail that the enemies in Siren act in a similar way. Another bug-like behaviour that they partake in is the building of a nest to protect Datatsushi, who hates sunlight. Planks and the like are used to board up windows, doors and pathways, blocking any light from reaching its deepest point. The inside of the structure is divided into multiple levels, like the winding tunnels of an ant nest. There were 2 works from beloved horror manga artist Junji Ito that Toyama mentions having served as inspiration for Siren, that being The Village of the Sirens and The Town Without Streets, the latter being credited as specifically having an effect on the making of the Shibito nest, but also the general narrative idea of the coexistence of normality and abnormality, the blending of the rift between reality and dreams. The world building for Siren is insanely detailed, and while the monstrous beings we face exhibit behaviours that an insect or animal would, they do actually possess their own written language consisting of what is basically a funky version of the Latin alphabet. The gameflow of Siren is distinct amongst other survival horror games I've played, utilising a time loop that steers the player through a chain of stages in what is called the Link navigation system. It's essentially just a timetable of each character's available stages and cutscenes placed at the day and time slot they occur, with the playable level spanning a total period of 3 days. You'll spend a fair amount of time with Siren's ensemble cast, but don't get too attached to anyone, because a lot of them do end up turning into Shibito that you'll have to fight against as another character. Each stage will have the player control one of the 10 playable characters through their different scenarios, and upon reaching the latest stage you've unlocked in the timetable, the time loop begins again, taking you back to the earliest available level. After you successfully reach the end of about 19 levels, however, you'll finally gain access to the stage select function, which is the point where the game really opens up since you can freely choose what levels you play next. Consequently, the order in which you play and unlock stages is not chronological. You'll often be jumping between them in a seemingly disorderly fashion, and probably struggling to fully grasp the story for the majority of the game. But what connects the levels in their natural progression are the events that happen within them that affect and even unlock later levels. The stages in Siren aren't only visited once. One reason is because you can't take too much damage in one go. You need only a couple hits or sometimes even just one for you or your escort to die. So expect retrying levels again and again until you've finally figured out your route from start to finish. If you do incapacitate enemies, in almost all cases they don't stay down for long, so they'll come right back after you if they spot you again, creating a sense of urgency when making your way through these stages. The second reason is because each stage has 2 mission objectives. At first only one will be available, but by returning to them you can see if the second goal is ready to be played, provided its requirements have been fulfilled. For example, you may have to unblock a pathway as one character, in order to allow another person into the building later on, thus making that stage playable for them. When I played the game for the first time, I decided to go in without using any online guides to see just how much information is given to the player to get through the game. As with any older title I play, I first read through the manual and familiarised myself with how everything works, as well as noticing a couple pages of cryptic hints near the end. While I did manage to complete the game using a lot of trial and error as well as the manual and in-game hints provided, it took me way longer than I think most people have patience for. But it was interesting to see that Siren wasn't impossible for me to beat without any external help, aside from what comes in a physical copy of the game. As frustrated and lost as I was sometimes, those feelings were overshadowed by how refreshing I found the overall experience. In a time where games basically tell you everything about where you need to go, it was weirdly satisfying playing Siren, where the game tells you barely anything in comparison about its numerous obtuse requirements to completing its levels. That being said, I didn't manage to collect all the archives without any guides, but that would only unlock an extra cutscene anyway. The Sightjacking mechanic is one of the major tools that is going to aid your progress in Siren. It functions slightly like a radio, where you use the analog stick to point in the direction of an enemy, indicated by their view appearing on screen. If you're close to a signal, a static effect will intensify, so you know where you should be adjusting your analog stick in order to tune in to the exact sight frequency. This unique feature of the Siren series was inspired by a submarine game Toyama played called 688 Attack Sub.
It changes hearing into sight, but submarine fights take place underwater where you can't see what's around you and have to pick up sounds your foes make, and analyze them to decipher their location. Some of these parts were changed from hearing to seeing and refined into the Sightjacking system. The very first Sightjack system was similar to the way the sonar is used in the submarine game. That meant that, through Sightjacking a Shibito, there was the risk that you may actually have your own location discovered. But as we went through the balancing system, we thought it would make things too difficult and modified it, until it finally became what it is now.
However, the convenience of this ability isn't just limited to knowing where your enemies are and what routes they're going to take, as they will also have their eyes linger on objects or areas of importance to guide the player. Some missions will demand you find a specific item as the goal, and give you no other information whatsoever, but simply using the enemies around you will point you in the right direction. Aside from this, there is also an instance where using the Sightjacking skill is necessary to help find a mission's escort character, whose hiding location is randomly determined between a couple different places. In terms of what is going to help you progress through the game, it's worth keeping an eye out for any camera angle changes while playing, since this indicates an item or important action is available within the boundaries of the screen. Also be aware of hints displayed at the beginning of a stage. Oftentimes I would revisit earlier levels just to see if a hint or secondary mission would pop up upon starting it, and that ended up being a very helpful habit for me. It's tempting to bash your head against the wall until you figure out the solution to a problem, but letting go and replaying older stages instead, especially those that are related to the characters or location that the one you're stuck on features, is a must. As bizarre as some of the objectives seem, they are actually logical in relationship to each other. And as soon as you tune yourself into Siren's logic, the easier the game becomes. Actions aren't always obscure, and sometimes no action is required at all. Like how in one of the levels you have the option of putting a face towel in a freezer, and using it in a later stage to help create a distraction for an armed enemy. However, you can alternatively just make use of your opponent's reload animation to run in and beat them up with a hammer. There's also another level where the player can time hits to break a lock with the occasional background thunder, concealing the noise being made so nearby Shibito cannot hear you, and opens up a different path through the area. The manual hints were a decent push in the right direction at times when trying to figure out what exactly needs to be done. For example, one reads, "First use the light, then the machine for the peeping person." Out of context, this advice doesn't help at all, but as you keep playing the level, you'll come across a Shibito blocking you from getting through one of the doors, and by examining the map, you'll notice that the garbage chutes in the building are suspiciously marked. Eventually, you'll pick up the EEG machine and fluorescent light bulb, and that's when it all begins to click. First, drop the light bulb down the chutes next to the Shibito to catch its attention. Then, when it curiously sticks its head in, you can send the machine down to trap the enemy. Not really sure how your character manages to lug this heavy-looking thing around, but hey, you're now free to continue your progress with the mission. When in doubt, interact with everything. I can't tell you how many times I've found the way forward by checking the action menu against every corner I could find. Not only this, but even hiding the playable character or escort in places is a requirement at times. which is something I discovered accidentally while being super cautious with escort missions during the early game segments. The in-game map is obviously helpful too, as it highlights certain structures that you're going to want to investigate. It doesn't show the player's position though, so when you're first learning the layout of a level, things can definitely feel quite disorienting when trying to figure out where exactly an enemy is through Sightjacking, and seeing absolutely nothing recognizable yet. Even when you do eventually learn a location and its pathways like the back of your hand, there comes the later Shibito nest levels, stripping away any familiarity you may have by obstructing roads with numerous panels, and adding a labyrinthine verticality that wasn't there previously. It can get very confusing trying to find your way through, especially with numerous Shibito crawling around, but that all adds to Siren's suffocatingly tense atmosphere. There's a variety of objectives the game presents you with. Some are more combat heavy than others, and many will involve an escort character. Sometimes you have to rely entirely on stealth, or other times you can have some weapons on hand to allow for some confrontation with the Shibito. You may get a handgun or hunting rifle, or just a wrench. Combat in Siren is, much like any older survival horror game, a bit clunky, although it does effectively add weight to your decision making when determining if getting into a fight to maybe open the way for a shorter route through a level is worth the risk. To be honest, you do eventually get into a rhythm when attacking the Shibito, which trivializes some encounters. You can sometimes outrun enemies too, but sprinting for a while will slow down your character as they start running out of breath. Shibito can either grab you or use a light or heavy attack, which will cause varying damage to your character that's affected by the weapon they wield as well. Typically, 1 to 2 shots from a gun will kill you, so going head-on with an enemy with firearms is basically asking to die. While not taking damage, the player's health will regenerate a small amount per second, and luckily your stamina doesn't affect your health regen or increase damage taken from enemies. Regardless of being able to beat the game by yourself, I wouldn't recommend it. Not only does playing through the game take way longer than it needs to, but also it's not a title that was made to be experienced on your own. And that's an idea that came from an arcade game named The Tower of Druaga.
It's a trailblazing action RPG in which a golden knight called Gil must climb a giant 60-foot story tower. Each floor has hidden conditions to trigger the appearance of treasure chests, such as defeat 2 black slimes, and not being able to beat the game without finding them was a challenge put to the players. Due to its high difficulty, hardcore gamers frequently exchanged tips in real time, creating a gaming urban legend that had been beaten by putting a cardboard box around the screen to increase concentration, though this really happened. It surpasses the world of a game, causing a flood of realistic and complex emotions. This definitely looks like what Mr. Toyoma was aiming for with Siren, by letting the internet enjoy that passion.
Siren has no difficulty options to choose from, so there is a universally unforgiving experience for everyone who plays the game. One of the cruelest parts if you're going for 100% is losing any archives you've picked up if you fail a mission. So you have to basically play through a level without dying to keep any collectibles by the end of it. Much like mission objectives, Sightjacking will help you locate the placement of archives, but a lot of the time it is just a case of pressing X on every surface you can find. There's one archive that can be acquired in one of the later stages, which actually unlocks a minigame you can play from the main menu. It's called Brain Cell Revival, and is advertised as a gift from outer space. It has a little Shibito head on the starting screen, and the aim of the minigame is to line up at least 4 icons of the same colour, and when there aren't any more free spaces on the board, it's game over. The other installments in the Siren series also have their own minigames you can pick up and unlock, and I honestly appreciate how much effort was put into the collectible virtual objects of Haneda.
I think that Siren was a game where the creators had quite a lot of freedom. For example, take the archive items that appear in the game. Rather than making them using CG, they go to all of the trouble of actually creating them, like props for a film, then photographing them, and then putting them into the game. When they were making the altar idol, they told me, I went to the fish market and bought a fish, then took off its tail, and used it for parts. What the hell is this? I thought as I put a stamp on the 180 yen receipt.
Apparently, the junk surrounding the altar was also made from things the team bought, even burning and melting the items to make it more realistic. It's really eye-opening to see just how much care went into even the smallest details of the game. And instead of files or basic text, they had actual items to be able to provide you that same information in an organic way. I adore the contextualization of mechanics and collectibles in games. And even the health regeneration aspect I mentioned earlier can be explained by the healing properties of the red water in the world of Siren. The 10 characters you take control of throughout the game range widely in age and physical stature, as some will be able to jump up higher ledges or sustain more damage from enemies than others. While every person we play as serves their own crucial role in the story, the main protagonist is arguably Kyoya Suda, a teenager whose curiosity about occult legends surrounding Hanada led him to visit during his summer holiday. His name was given by background writer Naoko Sato, who also worked with Toyama on Silent Hill. She was a fan of Goichi Suda, so apparently combined his name with that of a boy she liked in middle school. Kyoya forms a close bond with Miyako Kajiro, who tags along with him across numerous levels. And over the course of the game, there's a bittersweet romance that develops between them that is the driving force behind Kyoya's actions. Naoko Mihama is a TV reporter hosting an occult series called Darkness Japan, with the latest episode covering the sinister rumors of Hanada Village. She's obsessed with her appearance and even lies about her age, in part stemming from the competitive modeling and acting industry which favors younger talent. Her inner self-loathing comes out in her personality, which is often quite bratty and selfish, which is also due to her reluctantly accepting the Darkness Japan role since she's unable to land any decent opportunities. We also step into the shoes of Akira Shimura, through whom we experience some refreshing hunting rifle combat with, after mainly having to use melee or stealth to get through levels. He's an isolated old man who lost his wife and child in the events of 76, as well as his cousin Takafumi, who was imprisoned in the Miyata clinic after trying to expose the dark secrets of the village. Kei Makino, the priest of the village's religion, is also a playable character. He has always struggled with the pressure of his position and his duty in ensuring the success of the village's ritual, a responsibility which his adoptive father had previously failed at, and took his own life as a result. Kei is consoled and watched over by the guiding nun Hisako Yao, whom he desperately searches for once he realizes the ritual has failed once again. For a brief period of time, he is accompanied by Tomoko Maeda, a young girl who, angered with her parents for reading her diary, runs out of the house in protest only to be unwittingly caught up in the incident. We also control Tamon Takeuchi, a university professor who teaches folklore, and also survived the Hanada incident of 1976 unlike his parents. Yoriko Anno is an adoring student of his, tagging along with him on his visit to the village despite his complaints. While she did get on my nerves at the beginning, she definitely grew on me and I had a good laugh seeing her doodles of Tamon in one of the archives. The development team even considered making her vision appear blurry when she is without her glasses, but hardware restrictions force them to abandon that plan. Yoriko unfortunately isn't a playable character, but instead joins others during escort missions, at times coming in clutch. Next up is Reiko Taketo, a teacher at the Hanada Elementary School who tragically lost her 2-year-old daughter Megumi in an accident. As a response to her grief, she attaches herself to a student of hers named Harumi Yamada, who lost her parents in a car accident and as a result isolated herself from the other children. Reiko ends up sacrificing herself to save Harumi, perhaps trying to make up for her inability to save her own daughter in the past. Shiro Miyata is a character who stands out from the rest of the group, as some of his actions are pretty messed up. For some background, he is the twin of Kei Makino, but was instead given to the Miyata family who run the village's clinic. His upbringing was completely different to his brothers, and he was raised by the twisted Ryoko Miyata, who was emotionally abusive and not exactly sane. The Miyatas were obligated to protect the interests of the Kajiro family, which included silencing any opposition and imprisoning them within the clinic by claiming the victims needed permanent medical attention. Perhaps it's no surprise then that Shiro ended up so distorted, even callously murdering his partner Mina Onda in a fit of rage during an argument. We also first play as him the moment he wakes up and realizes the body he just buried has disappeared. This brings us onto the final playable character, Risa Onda. She's returning to her hometown from Tokyo, and is on her way to see her twin sister Mina. She stumbles upon Shiro and joins him on his journey to the clinic to find her sibling, completely unaware he killed Mina as he hides his shock under a calm demeanor, and claims to be looking for her as well. The hardest hitting scenes in Siren involve the characters we watch turn into Shibito, and undergo umiokuri and umigeri. It's heart-wrenching seeing characters we've worked to protect succumb to the effects of the red water, and none of them deserve this horrible circumstance. Most memorably, Harumi stumbles upon Reiko ecstatic that she's still alive, only to realize she too has turned.
Mrs.?
Akira Shimura takes his own life in the hopes that he wouldn't turn into a monster, but if anything, it seems like it just sped up his transformation. When he reawakens as a Shibito, he laughs maniacally, finally understanding there is no escape. Understandably, Naoko Mihama is slowly driven mad by the impossible situation she's found herself in. Spurred on by her deep insecurity of losing her self-worth as she ages, she drowns herself in the red spring of Mizuhiroko's shrine after learning that submerging yourself in the red water will grant you eternal life and youth. While she can be quite abrasive and whiny, it's depressing to see how her life and death were completely governed by an overpowering self-consciousness. She also ends up turning into a dog Shibito, which I can't imagine was what she was going for. With Tomoko, we get a thought-provoking glimpse into the perspective of someone becoming a Shibito. On her last playable level, she runs by a number of the other undead villagers, though none of them bother to attack her. Even Naoko Mihama just runs past her, flailing around and laughing. Tomoko's view is adorned with ethereal lights fluttering across the screen, and while she's unaware of what's happening, you as the player realize that she doesn't have much time left. As devastating as it is, she does technically get her wish to be reunited with her parents. The Shibito have two main goals, one being the creation of a nest for Datasushi. The other is increasing their number due to their pure intention to show everyone the beautiful world that they see, genuinely believing that they're helping others by basically killing them so they can join their group. We see that sinister innocence in the case of the Onda sisters, in the scene where Mina presses her face up to Risa's, showing her what looks like memories of their childhood and also Shiro's murder. It's stated that Mina's desire is a bit different to other Shibito, in that she specifically wants to become one with her sister so that they can be together. There are even those who reject becoming undead creatures and continue their suffering. We see a crowd of stumbling figures at the bottom of the dam, now visible as the water was drained. They're alive but in endless pain, having resisted the temptation of the Siren for God knows how long. In the game, Shiro ends up killing Kei, but in a sense the two merge into one, putting on his robes to form a guiding priest with the resolve to do what it takes to bring people salvation. He speaks the words,
"I don't want to be a monster,"
which at first you think pertains to becoming a Shibito, but actually the monster he was referring to was himself. In the end, he sets the victims in the dam free in exchange for his life. Then, called by the Onda twins, he walks into the flames to join them. Much like you have to put in work to figure out the actions required in-game, you also have to make the effort to piece together the story.
We thought about a system that would supplement the characters and events of the world, but also allow the player to pause and consider everything. We wanted to make it something where you could gradually dig up the truth, like having a character's comment be tied to a certain item that allows you to figure out its hidden meaning. I wanted people to finish the game, then put together all of the information they'd gathered once more, and then start trying to figure out the puzzle of the story.
The best example I can think of is surrounding the characters Kei Makino and Shiro Miyata, the twins separated at birth when their parents passed away in 1976. I wondered what family the two men originally belonged to, and that was answered when I found a photo of twins inside one of the empty residences in Hariodori. Looking at the map, I could see it was labelled the Yoshimura House, thus giving me, albeit a small nugget of information about Kei and Shiro that I didn't know previously. However, even if you've gathered what you could from a playthrough, there's a lot of backstory you won't explicitly know unless you've read the Siren manga series and the Strange Tales of Hanada, which are a series of short stories written by Naoko Sato. Personally, I loved the hunt for the puzzle pieces of Siren's narrative, and the way they would click together in my head gave me a sense of accomplishment. Sometimes I hate the feeling of finishing a game and having to depart a virtual world I've become familiar with, so the extra material that Siren has is not only meaningful, but helped me slowly close off my time with the game. In terms of inspiration for the story, Sato acknowledges the Japanese horror novel Shiki by Fuyumi Ono as having a strong impact on Siren's scenario.
This is an homage to Stephen King's Salem's Lot, and the work that you could say had the most influence on Siren. This is the ultimate in modern Japanese horror, where an isolated community is beset by peril due to strange happenings, filled with cultural and customary Japanese features. That turning into a monster, but still retaining human memories, is the scariest and saddest thing, is also a strong theme present in Siren.
The history of Hanada village can be traced back to the Jomon period at around 7,500 to 4000 BC, where the first settlers are said to have taken root there. Around 684 AD, the inhabitants were struck by a drought, and subsequently suffered from famine. However, a fish-like being named Datasushi, labelled the god of the underworld by the villagers, fell from the sky along with a comet. They saw it as though it had descended from the heavens, so it makes sense why they began to worship it. Some of the villagers, including a pregnant young woman, could not resist starvation and consumed a part of it. Understandably not very happy about being eaten alive, Datasushi curses the village and in particular the pregnant woman, causing her to become immortal. Not only this, but her descendants are denied death, in that even after their bodies decay, their minds remain trapped for all eternity, begging for release from their endless torment. And because they are rejected by Datasushi, they cannot become Shibito. The woman offers her own child as repentance for the stolen flesh and blood of the god, but continues to repeat this ritual for many generations, with the hope that one day her sin will be forgiven, the gates to paradise will open, and the village will be saved. This cursed woman is known as Hisako Yao during the events of the game, and the Kajiro family are her descendants. Hisako changes her face and personality over many centuries, often forgetting her true self and end goal, simply mindlessly continuing the sacrificial practice. Every 30 years or so, a pair of Kajiro sisters are born, one of which is destined to become a bride, or rather sacrifice, for Datasushi once she has reached puberty, and the other goes on to continue the Kajiro bloodline to ensure the next ritual can happen. The family exerts a very strong influence over the village, ensuring the survival of the ritual, with the people afraid to speak or act out against them to avoid the consequences enacted by the Miyatas. The sacrificed Kajiro daughter is given the name Miyako, and we know our current day Miyako is isolated from the rest of the family during her upbringing, and even excluded from the family register. During the game, we see references to the previous generation's Miyako of 1976, whose trapped spirit actually influences the thoughts and actions of Kei and Shiro. Because of her interference, she is able to pass on the Urien, a pair of clay statues later used by Kyoya to help defeat Datasushi and also free the trapped souls of the otherworld. The present-day Miyako has a dog called Cherub to help her see since she is blind, with her Sightjacking ability being an occasional result of being born a Kajiro. She has a strong concentration of Datasushi's blood, which also likely explains how she is able to see its memories of being eaten. Because of her powerful connection to the god, Hisako refers to Miyako as the perfect fruit, capable of finally absolving her of her original sin, and restoring the alien deity to its full form with the ritual of 2003. In the event that the ritual fails, Datasushi returns to the world and warps parts of the village, and anyone in it, into an interdimensional rift as compensation for the missing or inadequate sacrifice. These locations that are taken by the god appear to be covered by a landslide in the real world, and during the transportation it feels like an earthquake. For every time the ritual fails since the start of the curse, it brings new places into this other world, layering together to create an unstable upper layer. For example, we see areas from the last unsuccessful ritual of 1976, combined with the new structures from the current village mishap of 2003. In fact, the first upper Arato area is the only true real-world level, with the others all suspended in the otherworld. The way time works in this space is anything but stable, and operates on an endless loop. The beginning and the end are united as one within the eternal rift.
This village teeters on the edge of two worlds. It remembers the events that led to the borders being bent. Like a broken record repeating the same melody, the same events recur without end. This delicate balancing act resembles the action of a pendulum, a woman who has eaten the fruit of life, and a visitor from another realm.
The warped time is equated to the concept of Ouroboros, explained in the writings of Tamon's father Omito as a symbol of eternity with a snake or dragon creating a wheel by biting down on its own tail. The origin of its name is a foreign word meaning that which eats its tail. Since it is both the beginning and end in one, it replenishes itself and continues this cycle for eternity. It births, impregnates, and slays itself repeatedly. It is a being that both creates and destroys itself eternally. The story of Namiko Yoshikawa illustrates this idea of having no beginning or end. It follows a young girl in 1976 going to Gojaku Peak to investigate a strange light that she saw in the area, believing it could be related to the disappearance of her mother. She sees something resembling a wild dog and hurriedly flees from it, unfortunately taking a wrong step and falling into a deep pit containing red water. Namiko slowly changes into a dog Shibito and escapes, with the only remaining human thought of hers being to return home. As she makes her way along the mountain path, she encounters a young girl with a red backpack who immediately runs away. That child was Namiko herself. This is the paradox of the girl being frightened by her own future form, doomed to a small set of repeating events occurring in a loop shut in time. In conclusion, you could say that trying to decipher what exactly sets the cycles in motion is pointless. The horror lies in never being given an answer, and simply being whirled into the unfeeling and unstoppable force of a repeating window of fate. Within the otherworld lies the Mirror Pool, which is essentially a gateway to the underworld or Inferno where Datasushi resides. From its dwelling flows red water, or rather the being's blood, and it's a major part of the otherworld, replacing pretty much any body of water that we come across. Anyone who takes the red water into their body, whether through drinking it or having it enter a wound for example, are forbidden to ever return to the real world. This follows the concept of Yomotsu Hegui, where eating food of the underworld, and by extension the dead, means they cannot return to the world of the living, like a contract has been formed with the underworld itself. The red water grants eternal life, healing any injuries, but it's the catalyst for turning its host into a Shibito, eventually passing through the Red Sea and travelling to the underworld. Every 6 hours, a siren sounds from the other side of this Red Sea, signaling those who have taken in the blood of Datsutsuchi to come and make their journey to the underworld, consequently severing their humanity. Any who aren't properly prepared to make the journey stay in the otherworld until the next siren.
In a plot I thought of before, there was something about one of your friends suddenly going crazy when it hit midnight. The one who had, up until then, fought alongside you would turn into an enemy. It would be the fear of wondering who would be next. That idea was also the foundation for the siren heard at midnight. The sound of the siren itself already appears in Silent Hill, constantly sounding in the background when the setting changes to the horrible otherworld. I was quite interested in the idea of using something that symbolizes the bad and ominous as an effect, so we used it this time as well. Originally though, it was based on the very effective use of a siren in Industrial Symphony by David Lynch.
The Mana Stone is a large rock that arrived alongside Datsutsuchi and was enshrined within the village. It's shaped like a pyramid and seems to consist of a metallic reflective material. It's known by the villagers as the Sacred Stone from above, and could possibly be the spacecraft that the alien god travelled in. The idea that Datsutsuchi is from outer space is also hinted by the Haneda mineshaft opening photo that shows a stereotypical flying saucer UFO in the background, as well as a few other archives that reference an alien god or extraterrestrial interactions with human civilization. One in particular describes beings called skyfish, which in reality are an optical phenomenon that creates elongated artifacts that look like floating rods. They've had various paranormal claims surrounding their existence. In Siren, however, there's a legend that recounts stick-like flying creatures with fins like fish found in Gojaku Peak, and hikers who walked the mountain path would find mysterious scratches on their body. In the world of Siren, one of the issues of the Atlantis magazine, which is a parody of a real occult magazine called Monthly MU, even has a double-page spread that depicts a pyramid on one side, an obvious parallel to the Mana Stone. On the opposite page, there's a picture of a Shokoki Dogu, a goggle-eyed clay figure from the Jomon period. This sculpture is practically synonymous with Datsutsuchi, whose dogu-like head was kept and revered by the villagers who claimed it as the holy vessel. Much like the bodiless artifact of Haneda's deity, unbroken Shokoki Dogu figures are rare to find, and most are missing an arm, leg, or other body part. In many cases, these parts have been cut off, which is a neat similarity aside from just their appearance.
The master of strange and fantasy literature, H.P. Lovecraft, created a structure of fantastical myths called the Cthulhu mythos. Basic premise is that malicious gods, long ago the rulers of the earth, who had been sealed away, return in the present day, expanded upon by many writers after Lovecraft's death. Many of the former rulers are strange in appearance and themed around sea creatures, such as mollusks and cephalopods. Hanuda's name, a snake that sprouts wings, Miniaism being on the surface about worshipping fish, and a ritual used to revive an alien god are some of the traces all throughout Siren that they kept Cthulhu mythology in mind.
Over the centuries of the sacrificial ceremony being repeated since that fateful day, cultural and religious changes took place within the village, gradually forming their unique religion called Manaism. Siren's main theme is that of Hoshin Goeika, a chant that the villagers recite as part of the ritual, that mentions the arrival of Datsutsuchi and asking it to guide the people to paradise. It features lyrics evocative of a Christian hymn, speaking of their Lord in the heavens and the sins of their forefathers. The Book of Deliverance and the Mana Cross are influenced by the Bible and cross in Christianity respectively, and the act of umiokuri is basically a form of baptism, where one is also immersed in water to be cleansed of sin. This is then followed by the laying on of hands, which is meant to be the receiving of the gift of the Holy Spirit, the exact same premise of umigeri with the blessings of Datsutsuchi. The game even mentions one of the reasons Manaism wasn't openly practiced was due to Christianity's repression by the Tokugawa shogunate in the Edo period, which would realistically only be a problem if it were too close in religious nature. Within Manaism, the fruit refers to the blood owed to Datsutsuchi, hence why Hisako says Kyoya stole it, because Miyako gave him some of her blood. Considering how Hisako broke divine rules and consumed the flesh and blood of the god, this is an obvious nod to the original sin and the forbidden fruit in Christianity, which is also mirrored in the Fruit of the Edda legend written within the Book of Deliverance. While the setting of Silent Hill is a total opposite to Hanada, Siren's story also heavily surrounds a cult who follow a religion similar to Christianity, and ends with the protagonist destroying God. As a fan of the Silent Hill series, it was satisfying to see how Toyama built upon those themes in his next game. And while I enjoy the Order's place in the narratives of the games, I definitely found a new sense of appreciation for those themes after having played Siren. We see instances of religious practices and folk legends that are influenced by the presence of the weird fish god, and are often related to fishermen and sea creatures. For example, an idol found on an altar is made out of a doll and fish bones, and some kind of half-baby, half-fish artifact can be found within a well. The latter is impaled on a plank, reflecting the memories of Datsutsuchi being eaten alive on a piece of wood in the formation of a mana cross. As I mentioned before, two customs that are key to Manaism are called Umi-Ukuri and Umi-Geri, with the word Umi meaning sea. In the event of a successful ritual in the real world, this appears like a standard religious practice. However, it seems to be born from the memories of the Red Sea, and those who are called by the Siren to perform these acts in order to transform into Shibito. It seems failed rituals have happened before, especially since the incidents that transpire are very accurately documented in Hanada's religious writings. Some research notes within the game highlight the oddity of the marine aspects of the religion, saying that the villagers' worship of seafaring gods like Hiriko is peculiar given that they're situated in the middle of mountains. In addition to this, Hanada Village's version of Hiriko's arrival is unique in that it has him being washed up from a spring rather than the sea, which is the story told in other parts of Japan. The events surrounding Datsutsuchi are explicitly referenced by the local folktales like the fish from the sky and the legend of Yaobikuni, which cover the famine that drove a village girl to eat a peculiar fish that landed from above, and the promise to return the fish one by one, as well as the woman who lived for 800 years because she ate the flesh of a merman said to give everlasting life. From what I understand, Datsutsuchi was formerly worshipped as the god Hiriko, but over many years the story changed and eventually gave shape to Manaism, which depicts the deity and origins in a way that's more aligned with Christianity. For instance, the Good Tidings section of the Book of Deliverance describes the events as the angels heralding the Saviour's arrival on Earth. Heralds from on high appeared before a village girl, announced they did these glad tidings, rejoice in the coming of the Son of the Lord. I see Manaism as a response to dealing with an incomprehensible extraterrestrial being. Hisako and the villagers create the religion and its rules in order to grapple with the unexplainable situation they found themselves in, desperately trying to make sense of what Datsutsuchi is and what it wants. Hisako's offering of her child and descendants was, to be honest, not even explicitly demanded by the alien god. I guess she just hoped that that would be a reasonable thing to do in order to revive it to its full form. The practices of Umi-Ukuri and Umi-Geri are said to allow those involved to gain eternal youth, entry to the god's land, and the ability to transcend humanity, which is technically true. But the reality of that is becoming a mindless zombie with fish and bug parts trapped in a time rift for all eternity. Even the religion's depiction of their utopia is quite ominous, showing a blood-red landscape featuring the Mana Stone and numerous crowds of people and creatures strewn across it. Although this backwards representation of a paradise isn't all that surprising when considering the Mana Cross is an inverted form of the symbol for Nama, meaning life. Fate is a huge concept in Siren. Even before the time loop of the Otherworld, there was already a similar loop happening in the real world, Children were born or raised by certain families for specific purposes in their role of the rituals, allowing the continuation of it. This is why Hisako kills Miyako's sister near the end, because her god was finally revived, and so she didn't need her anymore to continue the bloodline, and secure future Miyakos as offerings. Hisako is also locked into providing sacrifices for Datasushi for hundreds of years. She doesn't even know why she does it anymore, and simply operates with the motive of continuing the ritual. The effects of fate run their course on other characters too. Kei is suffering from the weight of his role that was forced upon him, and Shiro is warped by his duty as a Miyata. We witness many characters trying to fight fate, like Miyako, who desperately tries to save herself by destroying the vessel. Similarly, in 1976, Akira's cousin and son tried to stop that period's ritual, but were ultimately unsuccessful. In general, very specific things occur as if woven by fate. For example, Reiko lost her daughter Megumi to a rogue wave that struck the beach, although no signs were detected by sensors and so no warnings were issued. Similarly, Harumi lost her parents to a car accident caused by a lightning strike, in turn leading to her becoming close with her teacher and also meeting Miyako, both people she needed in order to escape. These freak events and coincidences lead everyone we see in the game to be there at the right place and the right time to continue the cycle. While the ending scene of Siren feels somewhat promising with Kyoya wiping out the Shibito and Hirumi escaping to the real world, there's still an uneasiness that Toyama wanted to include. He says that Tamon's opening and Harumi's ending mirror each other as they both escape the other world as children. This was to make it feel like an eternally looping nightmare doomed to repeat itself. In a Q&A with members of the Siren team, it was asked if the curse was lifted once Kyoya decapitates Datasushi, to which the team responded that since Miyako's body was destroyed and her sister Ayako also met her end, this definitely means it's the final chapter of the Kajiro family's story in Siren. But as a result, the very notion of beginning and end itself is erased, becoming an eternally occurring incident. To add to the hopelessness of the situation, the boat of Itsubo myth gives a reason for repeating events to occur. It recites the tale of a woman with white hair being found in a bowl-shaped boat floating down the river. The inside of the craft was decorated with bizarre symbols, presumably the Shibito language, and the woman cradled a box in her arms, never once letting go of it. When we defeat the alien god at the end of Siren, Hisako's hair turns white and she falls on the altar while clutching onto the head of the deity. Suddenly, the ground around her crumbles away, and she, along with the head of Datasushi and the altar inscribed in numerous symbols, fall into the abyss. The best part, though, is that the day prior to the final battle, Hisako actually receives the holy vessel, aka the god's head, from her future self, prompting a series of actions that we play through which we actually enabled by beating the game. It's kinda trippy, but very much highlights the Ouroboros concept central to this world. This also stresses another concept of the story, which is the law of cause and effect, where for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. One example is the Urien figures, said to be divine creations containing the power to combat an opposing force created when it is born. One is engraved with a shield on its stomach, and the other a sword. And within them lies the power of Datasushi's destruction. But regardless of everyone and everything that guarantees the god's defeat, the opposite action of that is Hisako returning to the past, permitting it all to happen once again. This theme of opposites can be found within characters too. For example, the Miyatas are the shadow to the light of the Makinos, but both exist to serve the same overall function. On the topic of Hisako's character, the film Memento is noted as an inspiration for her dilemma.
In Siren, Hisako is in a chaotic state where her personalities from various eras interchange, and she can't control it herself. The terrible divine curse upon her continues eternally, like the main character of this film, Leonard. Their goal itself becomes their reason for living, and they can no longer save themselves, which makes them scary when you realize the hopeless insanity of it.
The number 3 makes an appearance in the game too many times to ignore. We experience 3 days in Hanada Village, which is situated near Highway 333. 3 also makes its way into the main theme song. The words Mitsu no go Shirushi signify the 3 holy signs, and represent the limits of the real world like birth, life, and death, and the first, second, and third dimension based on Moto Hagio's Silver Triangle. The narrative of this sci-fi manga is described as taking place in a non-linear fashion, unfolding across space and time before folding back upon itself at its culmination. It begins with the story of cycles that occur every 6 years, and the cultural practices that come with it, which reminded me of the time loops and siren sounding every 6 hours in Hanada, calling the Shibito to perform their own rites of passage. In ancient Greek philosophy, the meaning of 3 also pertained to time, with the past, present, and future, as well as the beginning, middle, and end. It was apparently regarded as the number of the divine. All of this, of course, can be applied to the themes and laws of Siren's world too. Siren's marketing included some fairly creepy trailers to intrigue potential players. The difficulty of the games wasn't shied away from, and was rather a selling point, as the European trailer did mention the mystery would not be easily solved. There was a rather notorious Japanese TV commercial for Siren that was pulled due to Sony receiving complaints from parents that the ad was scaring their children, as it was apparently played during the morning when they would be watching. The trailer depicted Tomoko Maeda, now a Shibito, knocking at a window and calling for her mother while her parents look over in horror. It appears that the same complaints were made about another trailer, showing Risa Onda when she comes across her Shibito sister Mina in the dark hallways of the Miyata clinic, which was also promptly removed from TV. The ads began airing November 3rd, 2003, and were withdrawn about a week later. But according to Toyama, this didn't hinder sales, and in fact it had the opposite effect, as is usually the case with controversy. The incident with the commercials was covered in sports magazines and the like, which actually got even more people talking about the game.
Sales had been slow, and then all of a sudden it was sold out the next day, and we were flooded with inquiries.
The marketing for Siren didn't stop at just trailers, however. When I looked at the back of my game case, I noticed the website www.forbidden-siren.com, and immediately went to search for it. At first I thought it would be a fairly ordinary page promoting the game, but was pleasantly surprised to discover that it in fact hosted an interactive Flash website. Even though the site has been long since shut down, I found that the site files had been saved on a site that had also closed down. But thanks to the Wayback Machine, I was able to get most of it working. After asking for your language option, it brings you to a dark screen showing a shrine of sorts. In front of an idol dressed in red sits 4 incense burners, each accompanied by some kind of wooden tablet. One bunch of incense sticks will illuminate, and you'll be able to click on the tablet underneath, bringing you to a character's prologue. For Kiyoyasuda, we see a view of his room, with his desk and shelves cluttered with amateur occult research. Clicking on his PC will display Kyoyo's trawling of internet forums, with users fascinated by a place called Hanada Village. Through his scenario, we see another secret website called hanadaincident.com, which is shown at the end of the computer clip. It mentions that a camera crew and host Naoko Mihama are visiting the village to film a documentary called Darkness Japan and interview locals, in order to uncover the mystery behind the earthquake that happened in 1976. You can also find a few photos of the area along with some newspaper clippings. For Akira Shimura's section of the Flash game, we get a glimpse into his living room with its dated interiors and his signature hunting rifle hanging on the wall. While examining his pictures and belongings, he ruminates on the memories of his wife and son who died during the catastrophe that happened in '76. He wishes that he was home that day so he could have gone with them. Akira explains that he knows the dark secrets of the village, but is helpless to do anything against its unsettling customs that are perpetuated by the Kajiro family. Harumi Yamada's part shows some of her things scattered across a wooden floor and desk. Through her sketches, we find out that her parents passed away in a car accident, and she has a close relationship with her teacher, Reiko Takato. She talks about meeting Miyako, who, like Harumi, has been seeing strange visions, but no one believes her when she tells them what she has seen. The young girl remarks that she feels less lonely having met someone similar to her, but admits she is afraid of what's to come. When it came to Naoko Mihama, I couldn't get the scenario to play no matter what I tried, but luckily there are a couple videos online that have it recorded. We see her bathroom with numerous beauty products and magazines dotted around the room. She loves pampering herself and indulging in skincare, and puts a huge amount of value on her appearance. Clicking onto the pile of magazines shows issues where Naoko herself is featured within them or even on the front cover, and she says she's at her happiest when in front of a camera. However, as she's gotten older, she's noticed the industry has gotten tougher, as it rewards the waves of newer, younger women who come along, so it's no wonder she's so obsessed with her looks. Suddenly, she receives a call from someone who is presumably her agent or her crewmate. He says it's a shame she didn't get an advertising job, then continues to say she should interview as many of the older villagers as she can, and in particular the Kajiro family, who are rumoured to be behind the disappearances in the 70s. Once you get an insight into the thoughts and feelings of all 4 characters leading up to the events of the game, you're treated to a brief scene of Miyako ominously sitting on the edge of her bed, and thus concludes the flash game. There's another site you can find by looking at Kyoya's student ID in-game. That includes a note with www.occultland.com written on it. Browsing to it will show a forum where users are discussing a place called the Bloody Village, complete with a banner of Naoko Mihama. On this page, an anonymous poster shares their unsettling experience in a ghost town adorned with blood-stained clothes. They claim to have encountered an old woman in an abandoned house. The poster fled terrified and dropped his camera. Another user responds saying it could be XX Village, where an outraged young man murdered all 33 villagers one night. But someone replies saying that the village was completely wiped off the map by a landslide in the 70s, and that the ghost town location could be the neighbouring Hanada village. That's when a user named SDK, obviously short for Suda Kyoya, posts, "Did you end up in the ghost town? 33 murdered XX village sounds awesome. I'm on summer vacation and have some time, so I'll take a train as close as possible, then drive my lovely car. Actually, a compact mountain bike. I will enjoy biking and checking this village out. I'll follow this map." A few days later, another person posts that news broke out of an earthquake hitting that location, and that several people are missing, showing concern for SDK along with some of the other users. So yeah, he basically got stuck in the other world for eternity because of a Reddit post. There's also www.shibito.com, with the URL found in the Shibito language on an archive item, which talks about a village that cannot be found on any official map due to its destruction by a landslide caused by an earthquake. The author of the post recounts their visit to the village, where they discovered nothing but rubble barring their way and an abandoned house, leaving them unable to locate the church they were searching for, although they did manage to discover a new rumour surrounding the mysterious Hanada village. A girl who may be a local junior high school student told me this. In the morning, the ghost of a boy appears in the fog since the landslide. She doesn't know why, but that boy carries a Japanese sword and guns. So is this the person who committed those 33 murders in XX Village? What does this new rumour mean? Of course, Kyoya matches this exact description in one of the game's final cutscenes, fulfilling his promise to Miyako to wipe out the village. And it's after this very scene that we receive the archive item with the site name. He was once someone who chased occult legends, and now he is the origin of one, the very one he was looking for all along. Essentially, the other world, being an unsteady interdimensional rift, can be seen from any time period as if through a filter during its fluctuating moments of instability. Maybe then, this is how someone in the past would have seen the murder of XX Village during the early hours of May 21st, 1938, and in turn started the ghost story that would end up leading Kyorya to Haneda. This event actually has ties to real history, as the movie Village of Doom served as the influence for its edition.
This is a shocking film based on the infamous Tsuyama Massacre of 30. The XX Village mass murder from Siren is clearly based on this incident also. In 1938, the Tsuyama incident, which happened in 1938 in Okayama, was committed by a 22-year-old man in a school uniform and gaiters, 2 torches on his head, and a bicycle lamp on his chest, armed with a rifle and katana, killing 30 villagers in a single night.
The Shibito.com site was also updated prior to Siren 2, with the addition of more information surrounding the lore of Yamijima Island, the setting of the sequel. Clues and information on the world of Siren also made its way into the inboxes of people subscribed to a Sony newsletter, with one email sent in 2004 including a link to hanedagreetings.com. On opening, an animation of a postcard will play on screen with the words, "The village is gone, destroyed. This unspeakable evil consumes us one by one. I feel the siren calling me. Find us before it's too late." In another 2004 email, a link to a video that was hosted on jp-kyoya.com was sent to Sony's newsletter mail list once again. The footage was described as having been shot in Haneda Village, and consists entirely of real live-action video. It is genuinely horrifying, and very much feels like the forbidden tape from The Ring. These secret websites, whose links could be found from things like the collectible archives in the game or by receiving emails, made an immersive kind of ARG experience for players who yearn to know more about the game's characters and story. The details you're able to gather aren't present in the game itself, and are surprisingly quite important in understanding the full narrative. While this hasn't necessarily aged too well considering all of the sites have been closed down and not all of them have been backed up properly, it's a very communal way of experiencing the game using other technology. I can imagine people coming together online to talk about the creepy emails they've received, or someone posting about seeing the URL for a site in-game, and it actually ended up being real after they typed it into their browser. Apart from the online marketing, I found out that there was also an escape room/haunted house-like event that took place in Switzerland, where visitors would walk through dark rooms and corridors with actors playing certain game characters or Shibito. I also want to give a small mention to the European press kit for the game, which is just like one of the archives you'd find in Haneda. It contains artwork and discs within a woven cover depicting the Mana Cross. And I can absolutely imagine Hisako holding one of these. I really admire how extra the marketing was for Siren. From its websites to its promotional events, you can see the extensive work that was put in even outside of what's stored on the game disc. This passion behind Siren never wavered even almost 20 years on from its original release. Fans were treated with 2 more games, of course, and they even got 2 manga series that I've mentioned previously. The first was The Call of the Red Sea, though this was unfortunately cancelled after several chapters due to the author's ill health, and it was replaced by Siren Rebirth. Both works were overseen by the Siren team and were released over 10 years after the game came out, and covers many details and perspectives you wouldn't get from the game. It explains a lot of what happened, especially with the 1976 event, and explores the relationships between characters in greater depth. There's also a book called Siren Maniacs, which is filled with development details, interviews, and more. It's been the primary source of information for this video, and I'm genuinely impressed with how much was documented. There's a collection of short stories called Strange Tales of Hanada, which cover a variety of short entries from the viewpoints of different people who have lived in the village. 4 of the chapters were originally published on Sony Japan's official Siren website, but the 5th was written specifically for Siren maniacs. The supplementary nature of these accounts is very helpful in exploring some of the key themes of the game's narrative. And there's one piece in particular from Kei Makino after he was killed that made me understand how horrifying the Kajiro curse is. It's even worse for him since he unwittingly had Kajiro blood enter his body through Kyoya's infected blood. So he's lost in utter confusion and dismay when he comes to realize he has been denied death.
I had returned in an incomplete form that could not be called human, cursed to live forever, unable to return to myself, a pitiful mass of flesh. I let out a scream of despair. The scream simply makes my formless mass of flesh tremble, unvoiced. Vinyl, torn by rotten wood sticking out of the rubble, flutters in the aimless breeze. From somewhere, the ground begins to rumble, a sound like distant thunder.
While looking through the pages, I was delighted to find that Junji Ito has a one-shot Siren manga in the book titled Demon's Voice, because I cannot think of a better duo than Ito and Siren. It follows a group of fishermen who are out at sea, when they suddenly hear a deafening siren ringing out from the distance. There was also a Siren Maniacs 2 book that came out which covers the second game, but I'll go into that if I make a video on Forbidden Siren 2 at some point. Apart from the books, the merch available for the Siren series is some of the coolest stuff I've seen, glow-in-the-dark Urian statues included. I've managed to get my hands on a few things, but I just have to put a spotlight on the Sony Cat mascot Toro and Shibito crossover figure. Considering my unhealthy obsession with the virtual cat and Siren, this is a dream come true. It's absolutely horrid and adorable at the same time. I wholeheartedly believe that Siren is one of the most lovingly crafted games to exist, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of everything you could discuss about it. Overall, the development team tried to get as close to reality as they could, instilling fear by blurring the lines between what is fiction and what is real through contextualized archives and even actual websites, as well as using real Japanese locations and famous legends, to build an atmosphere so distinctly based in their country from its architecture to its cultural aspects. Now, if you're like me, you may have thought about the real archives and costumes made for Siren, and how they could make a museum exhibit out of them. Well, you'd be right, because they quite literally have held Siren exhibitions in Japan that have displayed the props and outfits made for the games, with the first having taken place in 2018. The latest one actually took place in Namjatown between July and September this year, and even had a section that was made to look like it was straight out of Hanada Village, complete with actors taking on their roles as Shibito. The food and drink on sale included options like red water, the famous Hanada noodles, a mana cross pancake, and my personal favourite, the crying Tomoko hot dog. Members of the cast and development team have held live streams reminiscing about their time with Siren, and the actor who played Kyoya, Mitsuyoshi Shinoda, has posted videos of himself playing the game on YouTube. It's so wholesome to see people who worked on games over a decade old come together to celebrate them. You can feel how much everyone cared about Siren, and that extends to the fans too. Everybody's adoration for the series has been going strong for a really long time, considering there hasn't been a new title since 2008. Although I guess we did get a small nod to the games in Astro's Playroom. In my research, I stumbled across an article that mentioned that there was going to be a Siren Special Edition released a few months after the original came out, but was ultimately cancelled. It would have added difficulty modes, including an easy option and a new hint system, as well as having a gallery of sorts for character profiles and behind-the-scenes material. Even though we never got the special edition, there's a digital version of Siren that's available to play on PS4 and PS5. It also includes a trophy list which doesn't have a platinum for some reason, but it was still fun having a reason to play through the game all over again. After the Siren games, Toyama went on to make Gravity Rush and its sequel, adding another pair of phenomenal games to his record. Much like any of his creations, the virtual worlds depicted are so full of life and history that you can't help but feel absorbed by this sense of place. I very much look forward to an upcoming title from his studio which seems to have some possible Siren-esque features. But before that, here's a quick word from today's sponsor. Personally, I wouldn't want to be sightjacked if I were a Shibito. It's a total breach of privacy and gives away your location too. Luckily, I don't have that problem while browsing online thanks to Atlas VPN, who are currently offering a huge discount of their premium service at only $1.83 a month, with 3 months extra and a 30-day money-back guarantee. With Atlas VPN, you can stop ads and trackers and keep your searches private. And with a single subscription, you can protect all your devices. You can also unlock lower prices and content that isn't available in your region, which I use to watch shows and movies that aren't available on streaming services in the UK. With the click of a button, I can easily change my location and expand my Netflix catalogue even further. Atlas VPN is the best deal on the market, with their ridiculously low price of just $1.83 a month plus 3 months extra. This big saving is, however, a limited time offer, so be sure to take advantage of it while you can by clicking the link in the video description or using the QR code on screen. A big thank you to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. The YouTube channel for Bokeh Game Studio uploads videos where Toyama talks with other figureheads of the gaming industry, including the likes of Shinji Mikami. I really recommend watching the Golden Hour series as well as the development information videos on their upcoming game Slitterhead, so definitely subscribe to them for more news on their next title. Speaking of which, I noticed that one of the dev diaries shows some early footage with a similar main menu, and a clip which could be hinting at an ensemble cast or character switching like Siren has, including what looks like a possible playable dog section. Nonetheless, I'm intrigued, and if it's as good as everything else on Toyama's track record, I think we're in for something really special. Thank you to the numerous people involved in helping make this video a reality. It was a whole lot of work, as you can probably tell from the unusually long runtime for a video on my channel. Thank you to Miki Takahashi and Bokeh Game Studio for taking the time to answer some of the questions I had. I'll have a link to the full interview in the description. Please show some love to the guest voices as well. They all have fantastic channels of their own that are worth watching and subscribing to. A big thank you to my patrons as always for supporting me, and thank you for watching. I've been putting off this video for a long time since I knew how much effort it would be putting it together. There's a lot I had to leave out, which really goes to show how much there is to talk about with this game. Regardless, I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see any of my future work, please consider subscribing. And as always, see you in the next one.